A knight's breastplate did not begin as a gleaming shell, and it was not simply beaten from a random lump of iron by one heroic blacksmith. It began in mines, charcoal pits, furnaces, workshops, and trading networks stretching across Europe. By the time armor reached a battlefield, dozens of specialized decisions had determined whether it would turn a blade, deflect a lance, or trap its wearer inside a badly fitted cage. The process also changed across the Middle Ages. An 11th century warrior was commonly protected by mail, while 15th and early 16th century elites could wear articulated plate from head to foot. Plate did not suddenly replace mail. It accumulated gradually. Rigid knee defenses, shin plates, arm defenses, and torso coverings were added where protection mattered most. Surviving armor at Cherbourg Castle in South Tyrol preserves important examples from this transition. Everything depended on metal. Medieval iron was commonly produced by heating iron ore with charcoal in a bloomery. The furnace did not usually melt the iron into a free-flowing liquid. Instead, workers extracted a spongy bloom containing iron, slag, and other impurities. Repeated heating and hammering consolidated it into usable bars. Later medieval Europe also employed water-powered bellows and hammers, while blast furnaces increasingly produced cast iron that could be refined into wrought iron. Armorers rarely controlled this entire chain. Mining, smelting, refining, and trading could occur far from the workshop. By the later Middle Ages, regions including northern Italy and southern Germany had become major centers of armor production. Milanese armor was exported widely, while cities such as Nuremberg and Augsburg supported organized metalworking trades. The armorer was therefore not an isolated village smith, but often part of an urban industry supplied with standardized bars and sheets. The material itself was not uniform. Some armor was relatively soft wrought iron, some was steel containing enough carbon to be hardened, and some pieces combined different qualities within one object. Metallographic analysis of surviving armor reveals considerable variation, even among prestigious pieces. Medieval craftsmen understood practical heat treatment, but they lacked modern instruments for measuring temperature or carbon content. Their control came from experience. The color of heated metal, the behavior of scale, and the response beneath a hammer. Before shaping began, the customer had to be considered. Armor made for an individual needed to follow the body closely, especially around moving joints. Exact fitting practices are imperfectly documented, and no single method was universal. Measurements might be taken directly, recorded with cords or strips, or translated into workshop patterns. Large centers also produced armor in quantity. The 1360 inventory of the English Royal Armoury at the Tower of London and later commercial records reveal stockpiles, imported pieces, and components intended for broader distribution. The armorer first needed a flat piece of suitable thickness. Sheets could be created and reduced by repeated hammering, a laborious task made easier where water-powered hammers were available. Contrary to a familiar modern image, a breastplate was not normally poured into a mold. Iron and steel plate had to be forged. The blank was heated until workable, then shaped through cycles of hammering and reheating before it cooled too far. To create volume, the armorer used techniques now called raising and dishing. Dishing drove metal into a hollow form, often over a depression in a wooden block or specialized stake. Raising, compressed, and redirected the metal through carefully placed hammer blows, building a deep curve without simply stretching one area dangerously thin. The raw shape would look rough, covered in hammer marks and dark oxide, but its geometry was already becoming defensive. That geometry mattered as much as thickness. A rounded breastplate could encourage a weapon to glance away rather than strike squarely. Ridges strengthened surfaces without requiring enormous weight. 15th century Gothic armor from German-speaking lands often used pronounced fluting, while Italian armor generally favored broader, smoother forms, though real objects do not always fit neat national categories. Style, workshop tradition, intended use, and customer preference all influenced the final shape. The hardest challenge was movement. A solid shell around the elbow or knee would either leave gaps or prevent the limb from bending. Armorers solved this with overlapping plates called lames, joined by rivets and leather straps. Some rivets rotated. Others slid inside slots, allowing the plates to telescope. Surviving arm defenses and leg harnesses show holes, replacement rivets, and worn internal leathers that reveal how these mechanisms worked, even when later restoration complicates the evidence. The breastplate and backplate also had to cooperate with the rest of the harness. At the waist, articulated falled plates protected the abdomen and hips. Tassets could hang below to cover the upper thighs. Buckles, straps, turning pins, hooks, and shaped edges transferred weight and held components together. A well-made harness distributed much of its mass across the torso. Experimental wearers and surviving 15th century suits show that full plate was heavy, but not the immobilizing burden imagined in later folklore. Mail remained essential because plate could not cover every gap. It was made from thousands of interlinked rings, usually arranged so that each ring passed through 4 others. Many surviving medieval examples use alternating rows of solid rings and riveted rings, although construction varied. Riveted rings had to be formed from wire, overlapped, pierced, and closed with tiny rivets. Producing a mail shirt demanded extraordinary repetition, and mail making was often a specialized trade separate from plate armor manufacture. Once the major plates had been shaped, their edges were trimmed and frequently turned outward into rolled borders. This removed dangerous sharpness, stiffened the edge, and helped resist deformation. Holes were punched for rivets, straps, and linings. Internal textile or leather components reduced chafing and stabilized the armor on the body. These perishable materials rarely survive, as well as steel, so museum displays can make medieval armor appear barer and simpler than it originally was. If the metal contained sufficient carbon, selected pieces could be hardened. The plate was heated and rapidly cooled, or quenched, transforming its internal structure and increasing hardness. But excessive hardness made steel brittle. Tempering reheated it more gently to restore toughness. Scientific examination shows that results ranged from expertly controlled to uneven or unsuccessful. Some armorers hardened only particular parts, while many lower-cost pieces remained unhardened because material, fuel, skill, and risk all affected the decision. Finishing required another sequence of specialists and tools. Files and abrasives removed scale and hammer marks. Grinding wheels, sometimes water-powered, accelerated the work, while polishing produced the reflective surfaces associated with court armor. Not every harness was mirror-bright. Surfaces could be left rougher, painted, blackened, or covered with textile. The Mendel Housebook, a collection of occupational images begun in Nuremberg around 1425, depicts metalworkers using anvils, hammers, tongs, and grinding equipment within recognizable workshop settings. Luxury armor then crossed into the world of art. Craftsmen etched patterns through acid-resistant coatings, engraved lines, punched textures, applied gilding, or added contrasting darkened surfaces. The Royal Workshop, established at Greenwich under Henry V, created distinctive decorated harnesses, while the surviving Greenwich album records designs and measurements for elite customers. Such objects were military equipment, displays of rank, diplomatic gifts, and advertisements for the reputation of the workshop that produced them. Before delivery, the pieces were assembled, adjusted, and tested. Some armor bears proof marks associated with weapon testing, although their interpretation depends on date and workshop practice. Guild regulations and contracts could demand particular materials or standards, but enforcement was never perfectly uniform. The greatest makers signed or stamped pieces, and marks linked armor to centers such as Milan, Innsbruck, Augsburg, and Nuremberg. Even so, many surviving harnesses are composites, assembled or altered long after their original manufacture. The finished armor was therefore not the product of one mysterious technique. It was the conclusion of a chain, ore dug from the earth, trees converted into charcoal, blooms consolidated, metal traded, plates forged, joints engineered, surfaces hardened, ground, fitted, lined, and decorated. Archaeology and surviving collections reveal both remarkable skill and ordinary imperfection. Medieval armor worked not because its makers possessed secret knowledge, but because generations of specialists learned how to make rigid metal move like a second skin.